Welcome to our session, Teaching Academic Language in the Math Classroom. I'm Ben Grimley, creator of the Speak Agent Math Plus Language program and a principal investigator on linguistic research sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education and the National Science Foundation.
And I am Dr. Michelle Dyson, the Instructional Supervisor for Middle School Mathematics, grades 6 through 8, with the Prince George's County Public School System. Today, we're going to explore a number of topics related to content and language integration in middle grades mathematics. I will start us off by providing context for the learning challenges faced by students and teachers. I'll share my research, math literacy framework, and actions taken by my school district.
And I'll add in some learning sciences research that my team at Speak Agent has done through partnerships with Digital Promise and the NSF. This will lead into the second part of our session, which will examine specific instructional strategies for Math Plus language instruction and how we jointly implemented them. We'll tie each strategy back to PGCPS's math literacy framework.
And in the final segment, we will share our experiences and lessons learned. You will gain insights into the students' outcomes, impact on teachers, and best practices for high fidelity implementation.
Our goal is for you to leave this session with specific ideas and tools you may use to integrate the language of math with your own practices. We also hope to prompt you to think outside of the box as to how math leaders can partner with education technologists to co-design programs that will be impactful for all of your students.
All right, let's start with a little background. Prince George's County Public School System is the 20th largest school district in the United States and the second largest school system in Maryland. We have around 132,000 students and 208 schools. PGCPS has a diverse population of students, with about half of our students from the African American population and 36% from our Hispanic population. With such a large, diverse population of students, we found that a big challenge we faced in mathematics was around communication. How mathematics concepts are presented through language, understanding words, and just all around word meaning. In the area of mathematics, there is a demand for language linguistics. For many of our Ls, this is a challenge. Not only do they face the challenge of learning a new form of language, also learning to master academic language has been a challenge. Today, mathematics students are not only expected to listen, talk, and read, but also to write using mathematical language. In the state of Maryland, we use an annual assessment, which we call MCAT. That tests math reasoning and modeling skills. It's been a persistent challenge for our students to achieve proficiency on this test. And one of the rationales for that is because 40% of the test centers on the scoring around reasoning and modeling, and 60% is on content knowledge. This lets us know that academic language is needed in all cases. Here's an example from the test. As you take a look at this problem, we know that before a student can apply anything they know about using a net to find the surface area of a triangular prism, they have to sift through the language presented in this problem. Not only do students have to know the academic language when we're talking about surface area, triangular prism, they also have to pay attention to the non-academic language around, like with words such as impossible, and language functions around explaining your reasoning before they can even get to the mathematics. This can be a challenge of its own for all students, which can lead to widening the gap when we start to think about our Title I and Title III students. In the area of mathematics, to address our literacy challenges, we created a framework to provide teachers with a structure for addressing literacy through initially identifying research-based strategies that align with the standards of mathematical practice. As the center of this literacy map, as you'll see in the middle, it centers around reasoning and academic language, which supports our standards for mathematics practice 2 and 6. With this map, we have identified for teachers what are those strategies that's going to help our students engage in reading, writing, discourse, which includes both listening and speaking, and modeling. All of these center around building proficiency with academic language and reasoning skills. Not only did we create a framework, it was very important that we identified those rich tasks where students can uplift the academic language through tasks, through activities, using graphic organizers, and we created this math literacy workbook for our students. And with this workbook, you'll find teachers will have access to lessons, worksheets that implement all of those strategies for our students. Although these were a great start, we needed more ready-made tools, more student engagement, and more data collection in order to bridge the gap. With the shift to digital learning, that has widened the equity gap and the language gap, but it also has opened up new opportunities. Through the collaboration with my district ESOL department, Speak Agent was introduced to me and my team, and we knew right then this was an additional piece needed to support our literacy work.
So I want to talk a little bit about the learning sciences behind the academic language of math. So learning happens in 3 stages: getting familiar with new math concepts, developing word recognition, decoding skills, practicing the vocabulary. Then it moves to the next step where students build comprehension. They do that through interacting with math stories, authentic real-world stories in different ways: sentence frames, sentence stems, dialogic reading. There's a whole host of different reading strategies for math. And then in the last stage, they show what they know by demonstrating their mastery of the concepts they just learned in math communication, primarily in writing, even in creating or writing problems for other students to solve. And at all of these stages, there's different roles for teachers to collaborate with students on getting them through the stages and mastering those concepts. That model uses really this little equation of strategy plus content plus learning task equals an activity. What I mean by that is we don't want you to just have to read about the strategies and figure out how to implement them. Our goal is to provide the content and the learning tasks. And so in the collaboration we had with PGCPS, what you'll see in the next section is we actually took elements, specific tasks from their math literacy workbooks and from their framework and curriculum, and built out content and learning tasks that use those research-based instructional strategies to get at all of the curriculum and standards. So let's talk about that. So we're going to go into very specific examples of some of the strategies and activities that we developed together. So looking back at the PGCPS Math Literacy Framework, there are 4 different quadrants to this: reading strategies, writing strategies, discourse, which is listening and speaking, and then math modeling strategies. We'll start with the latter. So one example of math modeling is being able to take a visual representation of something and really understand what it is. So we can take an example of one of these concepts, which is dilation, and we want to look at that from multiple different angles. We might have an example of a dilation just being an expanding geometric shape, but we could also look at some real-world examples, such as, a movie theater where you have a film strip and you have the light going through the film strip, and what's shown on the screen, or at least in old school movie theaters, is that it's an expanded version in all the same dimensions. It's a rigid transformation of what was on that film strip. And so seeing that may give them a more concrete example than the abstract triangles that are getting larger. So we want to provide those kinds of models. Another example would be diagrams. You can label diagrams, but you can also describe what you're seeing in the diagram. And diagrams are great at helping connect different pieces and parts that make up a greater whole. So here we've got, edges, vertices, faces, a net, a base, a volume. We've got all these different concepts happening in here. And we want students to make those connections and actually use their voice to describe those connections. So another example of a strategy that PGCPS uses is called the rule of four. And the idea is to use different kinds of representations. So you got things like diagrams and graphs. So here we're trying to understand the concept of squaring. You've got lists and tables. So here we're giving some examples of how you can get to that in a from moving from multiplication to squaring. And here's a verbal description. And then, of course, we want to put it into an equation form.
We know in mathematics, it is very important to have students interact with all four representations of the mathematical concepts. We want to make sure students are seeing and visualizing it graphically. They're looking at the numbers, the words, and the symbols. So when we use this, we wanted to make sure that all were present throughout each digital lesson as Speak Agent was creating these, taking out activities and placing them on the platform and providing students with a well-rounded understanding of academic language that they were learning within that particular unit.
Great. So the next kind of strategy would be reading strategies. So let's go through a couple examples of those. One thing that we did together as part of this process is taking those math literacy workbooks and converting them into something that's digital and interactive. So here's an example from the math literacy workbook of a parade example where you're learning, how to move about on the coordinate plane, what's an origin, how do I move from point A to point B, that sort of thing. And so converting that into something interactive gives you an opportunity to go deeper and to step through it. There's a couple of key strategies in here. Dialogic reading is one, this idea that as you're going through the material, the student is responding to context questions, to different kinds of questions all the way through. There's also the idea that students can interact with the text. They can highlight, they can expand the text size, they can dim the screen around, they can listen using text to speech. There's different ways they can interact with it, which are helpful reading aids for many, many students, whether they be Ls, exceptional students, you name it. We're going to come back to this because we're going to talk about another reading strategy called the 3-read protocol. This is really a strategy that helps you first understand the context, the situation, the scenario, then understand the information you need to solve the problem, and then go through the steps. So this is another activity type where in the first step, you're actually using sentence frames to fill in some blanks, but primarily you're just trying to situate what's happening in the story, get some story background. And that moves on to a next step in that 3-read model. You can actually fill in the blanks now. There's little hints that help students understand what kinds of information they might need to put in those blanks. But essentially, they're trying to fill in the key information they need to finish that story. A great additional strategy that goes with the 3-read strategy is comparing against a writing model. So if you can see how it was done in a sample way, with a sample explanation that was done correctly, and compare your work against that, you can kind of compare and contrast and start to reflect upon your learning. And then in the last stage of this particular activity, what we did is we have them recapitulate the solution steps that they went through in those previous screens. So now they actually have to think through the problem, developing their math reasoning and communication skills. So I want to talk a little bit about writing strategies next. So in this step, the strategy is writing your own problem. And you're doing that not just for yourself, but for a classmate. And so we want students to understand what is the key math question and concept that they're writing about, and give them a specific question to ponder. And with that guidance, students then can create their math problem, but we break it into smaller steps. So first they have to think about, well, what information do I need to answer this question? If it's a pin, well, you need to know how many digits are in that pin. Otherwise, how can you calculate the probability? And then write their own problem. And on the right-hand side in that panel, where you see the pig pen and the grayed out information, that's actually a model. That's giving them an example of another puzzle so they can kind of see the type of information that would be needed to write a good math problem. There's even a little help video built into here. And then there's other supports. Everything can be listened to as text to speech. There's a word bank, there's visuals, there's different ways for students to get help embedded in here. And then at the last step, we ask them to self-check against a writing rubric, which is really important. It can be a simple rubric, but we really want students to think about, be intentional about their writing and make sure it has the information that a classmate would need to solve it, that is engaging for a classmate, that it's the right answer. They're not just throwing something out that has a mistake in it. And in some steps that we're not going to go through here today, there's a whole way for teachers to moderate this and review it, and then for a classmate to solve the problem that the first student created. I want to talk a little bit about this problem of background knowledge. I was sitting in a professional development meeting with a number of other teachers, and actually there were a lot of the teachers who had trouble getting their head around this particular problem, which is an 8th grade math problem. So if the teachers are having trouble solving it, it could be problematic for the students as well. And there's a lot of things going on with this particular word problem, but one of the problems inherent to it is you have to know how a rain gauge operates in order to really understand how to solve this problem. And not everybody knows that. So the basic premise here is the top cylinder is related to the bottom cylinder, but the way it's drawn, you're not even sure if it's a cylinder. It could be a cone, right? So there's a whole host of challenges with this, but we don't want to weaken the content. What we want to do is step students through the process of understanding it. Remember that 3-read strategy? Well, we're going to bring that in, but we're also going to add something called a marginal note strategy. So we are walking them through first the context, but then we're going to ask students to respond to questions and comment on it. So now they're understanding this is about gardening, right? That's why we have a rain gauge. That's what it's used for. And then we go to the next step. Well, what information is important about this? Well, they have to think about the shape of the rain gauge, that there's a part in the top that collects the rain and the part in the bottom where the water goes. So there's all these steps they have to think through. We have to get them to think about what the unknown is that they're looking for in order to solve this. So we're going through step by step, finally getting to what's the solution path. Can you figure out what's the next step to get to a solution? And so this is really a great strategy, and then allowing them to put in their notes and allowing teachers to have access to that and review it and see how their students are thinking. It's a really great strategy. Mm-hmm. And at the end of it, you really want to build that step-by-step understanding to really get to the full problem.
And this was a great re-envisioning of a hard-to-crack worksheet activity. We know that one challenge we've always had with the rain gauge word problem is that most marginalized learners don't know what one is or how it works. So putting this in a real world context helps students build and activate background knowledge. This is an awesome activity and an awesome representation of the type of work that Speak Agent provided our students and how to strengthen activities and problems that we already had created.
Great. Another strategy, and these are all strategies that are used by PGCPS and that we've come in and aligned to. So for the vocabulary development strategy, here in this activity, what we want to do is make this vocabulary more accessible So we start off with a short passage and illustration, but then we want to move to break it apart into what are its constituents. So what are things that would be measures of variability? And students can click on these little buttons, the information buttons, to get hints or to see visuals of those different words or concepts. And they can pick and choose what they think goes with that particular complex concept. These are ones they've already learned in a previous unit. So that's how they're making those connections. So let's move on to the last type of strategy we're going to talk about today, which is discourse strategies. So those discourse strategies, one of them, a great one out there that's thought of as something only being for English learners, but is really broader than that. It's called verbal repetition. Verbal repetition really enables students to gain a certain level of fluency with that word that reduces their cognitive load. That basically means they don't have to think about it anymore. It becomes automatic to them, so they can focus on what the teacher's saying, what the text they're reading is, without their brain wandering off trying to pick apart what is this word. This can be done as a repetition strategy, but there's also ways to use this particular voice recording activity. There's a way to use this activity to also answer open-ended questions about the thought process that a student is going through. So there's a lot of different uses for these kinds of voice recording tools.
So with this activity empowers students to practice speaking and listening without fear of failure, which has historically been a barrier for our students, and especially our English language learners. It also gives students agency to choose which voice recording they want to share, which the students find to be very exciting. In general, the math language approach helps our students squeeze in more independent practice. It provides more communication, but it also gives them the opportunity to get peer and teacher feedback when they are ready for that. Now, putting this all into practice. In Prince George's County Public Schools, we understand the importance of professional development and the communication and the importance of communicating needed to implement programs with fidelity. So our professional development always stems around focusing on the teachers, administrators, our departmental partners, and parents. When introducing Speak Agent, we know it was critical to communicate how the program aligns with our district initiative, especially our district initiative around literacy. We wanted to show a clear alignment to our district curriculum, tools, and resources already implemented in mathematics. In other words, we didn't want to provide teachers with another cookie cutter program. So with all new programs, it is important that it fits into all three areas of this triangle that you see here, around the area of curriculum, assessment, and instruction. This will ensure high quality instruction for all students. If a program fits tightly into all three areas, we know we will be able to capture some form of qualitative or quantitative data if it fits within this triangle we have here. So as we moved into this whole pandemic and we had to shift to a virtual learning environment, it was very important when we talk about fidelity that we made sure that our instructional guidance document, which fits into our curriculum and then it ties into our instructional practices, we wanted to make sure that we were intentional around when we wanted teachers to teach or provide students access to Speak Agent. So as you look at, this is just a portion of a guidance document that we provided for our students, and Speak Agent and work closely with Prince George's County as we identify what were those lessons week by week, day by day that we wanted students and teachers to engage students with in that language. In the lessons, and Speak Agents work closely with us to identify which one of these activities fit best. So as you can see on this instructional guidance down at the bottom, we have Speak Agent activity. For this particular lesson, on this particular day, students will use that ratios activity where they scramble sentences. And as you see, as we move to Thursday, where you see Speak Agent activity with this particular lesson, students will focus on proportional relationships And teachers had the opportunity to pick whether or not students would engage in the word gallery or the diagram activity.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit about the data that you're going to need to effectively monitor success of your implementation of these kinds of math literacy strategies. So the first thing that you need is giving tools to teachers to monitor their class progress, see which activities are being used by the students, which ones are being completed, if they have any scores for those activities, how much time they're spending on task with those specific activities, which also embed the strategies that we talked about earlier. So getting all that information to get a picture of a classroom is important. But then we also want to be able to look at individual students' growth, not just their usage of activities, but down on the bottom of this screen where you can actually see their progress learning the specific math vocabulary and concepts and tracking those across whether they can recognize them, comprehend them, or even apply their knowledge. Kind of the missing piece that we learned as a lesson mid-year with this past year is really how do we give school leaders the tools to see that, bubble that up and see all the different classrooms in their school and be able to really easily look whether they want to look every week or every month or every quarter or some combination of those to be able to see comparatively how those different classrooms are doing and why is one moving faster than the other. And this just leads to all kinds of interesting questions and dialogues with classroom teachers that can help uncover barriers and how to improve that implementation and collaborate on that. And so this can be used to really deep dive what's going on in a particular school or particular classroom.
And which is very important, back to this slide here, which was a lesson learned for us. It's very important because as we want to ensure that our administrators are monitoring student growth and student usage, this became a very important tool for us. And not only from administrators' perspective, we also want to look at it and go even a little deeper from a curriculum perspective of where it is that we need to go next and to provide teacher support and to provide our students support, whether it's through professional development or if it's some new additional activities or strategies we need to embed within our curriculum.
So another lesson learned is how critical it is to really understand how students are using language in math. So one thing we were able to implement together was this tracking tool to understand how much students are interacting with different visuals around the math concepts, how much listening they are getting of the math vocabulary, how many times they're speaking. Each one of these represents a voice recording that students have made, how much they're reading, and how much they're writing. And we can also compare, this actually has a comparison of the second quarter of the first quarter, so we can track this quarter by quarter over time and use it as, these are both, at the same time, they're desirable outcomes, but they're also things that explain other outcomes, intermediate outcomes. So, we want to be able to see ultimately, does this kind of usage lead to changes in other things, whether it be assessment, performance, or what have you. So it's going to be a really critical data tool for us.
Right.
And we can already start to see an impact from those in vocabulary growth. If you remember our learning model, it broke the vocabulary into 3 different stages. The first stage was that recognition and decoding. The second stage was comprehension. Do they know what the words mean? That last stage was actually writing with those, which is a relatively new one in this model. So we can track this over time and start to see that progress for the average student. And that's a great key performance indicator that can be tracked back at the end of the year to see how did this program do, how did individual schools do, and really improve upon it, the implementation for the following year.
Also, another important piece to this data, as we continue from lessons learned, we noticed that because it's not a cookie cutter program, we wanted to ensure that we were meeting the needs of not only our students, but our teachers. So what was very important is that we engaged the voice of students, we engaged the voice of our teachers, and we engaged the voice of our administrators, which was very important. So a lot of feedback was provided from teachers based on what they noticed, what they needed, and those implementations were made right away as that feedback continued to come in. From some of the schools, we noticed that even schools that had a challenge getting started with implementing the program, as the students started to engage in the program, they noticed and they started to share it out loud at professional developments or through emails about students enjoying the program. The students found that they enjoyed the speaking portion of the program. They just enjoy engaging in the activity. And not only did they enjoy it, they noticed even their use of academic language was increasing throughout this work. So it's very important that whenever we are implementing a program and we're talking about data and we're talking about fidelity, it's important that you hear the voice of all your stakeholders to ensure that you are targeting and hitting those goals that you have set forth. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's something that's important to do on a continuous basis too, not just in the initial program design, but over the course of the year, continue to listen to the teacher voices, to the student voices, the coaches,
Mm-hmm.
And continue to iteratively build upon that. Has been a strength of this collaboration.
I add on one more piece, which is important to this work, is because we had this partnership with the ESOL office and our Title I office. And as we start in our area office, as we started to talk and implement this whole work around Speak Agent being used as a critical tool to our curriculum document, we started to have conversations with our special ed department, even not just the numeracy coaches in mathematics. We started to provide training and sent our Title I coaches and special ed coaches, ESOL coaches. So you had not just in mathematics coaches, you just had the work of various departments working together to ensure that we were targeting and providing support to all teachers and students. So that's very powerful in a district so large as Prince George's County, that we were able to, with this program, and include so many different departments to provide support with this work. So that was very important in moving this work.
Yeah, that's a great point. And also I'd want to mention, for those teachers who may not feel as comfortable with new technology or new programs, we were able to offer this one-on-one online coaching where they could just sign up on demand for 15-minute sessions. We had dozens of these, in the first couple of quarters of the year. It's just a lifeline for them.
Yeah.
Also, by aligning so close to the CIA, the Curriculum Instruction Assessment, and all the strategies and the math literacy workbook, that whole framework that PGCPS developed, it's not an additional burden on the teachers that here you're going to do something different. You're going to go off in this other direction. It's just incorporating a new set of tools into the lesson plans that you've already got. And it's a lot lower burden. I mean, there's even things built in for automatically assigning content to students at a particular time. There's, all kinds of tools to see data. There's just things that actually make teachers' life easier and reduce burden. And that's been a really critical piece of being able to scale it up in a district as large as PGCPS.
The one piece you had on the slide, it says engaging students and teachers and stakeholders. I just think one stakeholder that we have to add to this piece is that to make it easier for teachers, you also did a training with parents to introduce our parents to this work, which was important and beneficial to the work of what the teachers have to do to implement and how to support students when they were asked to engage during the asynchronous learning opportunities.
So we want to wrap up our session with a few key takeaways from our experiences.
Yeah. For me, I'd like to start if you like. I think one key takeaway from this whole process is it's so important that you allow data to drive every decision that you make. And what we did is we used the data to drive decisions, even data around, we started with just usage. As we noticed around the day, what was the data, what was the usage data telling us about students having the opportunity to engage. Once we looked at that data, we knew we needed to make some adjustments. So we started off with whole group professional development. Then we knew we need to go to school and to individual schools and offer professional development support. Then Ben also had one-on-one coaching support. Then we knew we had to bring in others. So I think it's so important that you allow the data to drive and make decisions around your next steps in this work. I think also because it was so tightly aligned to the curriculum, it was so important that we made sure that as we were presenting and talking about Speak Agent, we always tied it into what teachers were already familiar with so that we wasn't adding any additional, or it appeared that we were adding any additional burdens to this piece of their work or anything new. So that was a great lesson. But I think the data, and then number two, staying the course, not losing track. Because a lot of times, because when we first started implementing Speak Agent, we started off as a pilot. And with that pilot work, each year we added more and more. And I think as we transition into this whole pandemic and this virtual learning, it really pushed the work. So we're now seeing the fruits of our labor. So staying the course, not stopping in the middle and say, oh, this is not working. No, we use the data. We knew that in order for the data to be valid, we had to ensure that the program was being implemented with fidelity. And so I look forward to us continuing this partnership. And each year you see the work growing and growing, and you see evidence when you're going on learning walks, when you hear students using the academic language, when they're explaining their reasoning, when they're critiquing the reasoning of others. It's awesome to hear. And then as we're looking at our benchmarks in our district, and we're looking at student responses, and you see them using the academic language in their writing to explain and justify their thinking, it's exciting. So I think those are a few lessons learned that I would like to share. I hope I left some for you, Ben.
Oh, no, you did. You did. Actually, I want to say this has been a great collaboration. It's actually becoming a model for the way we're thinking about, collaborating with our district partners. And, one of the great things that you had going for you is you'd already been thinking through for many years this whole math literacy framework. Mm-hmm. And I haven't really seen that level of depth with other districts that we work with yet. Mm-hmm. And so, I want to make a pitch to the participants in the session to think about, make the case for a different way of looking at education technology. Instead of just searching for a product that fits your list of desired features and checks those boxes, consider whether education technologists can be effective as partners in developing and executing your strategy with you before you sample their wares and go off in a direction with a particular technology. So with that, I would like to encourage everybody to please visit our roundtable. It's at Friday, April 23rd at 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Both Dr. Dyson and myself will be available to answer whatever questions and just start a discussion around some of the lessons learned or about some of the research or what strategies, whatever it is you want to pick our brains about. We'll be there. And thank you so much for tuning in.
It's just been an awesome opportunity during this virtual learning experience that we've seen increase in student usage, and not just usage, but to see students from quarter one to quarter two started to grow in the areas that we really want students to move from the visual, more opportunities for speaking, and then eventually move into them applying through that writing piece. And we're starting to see incremental growth. And I'm excited about that work. especially during the pandemic, where we have been intentional from the curriculum office, but teachers have actually brought it to life for students to use during in the class or during asynchronous opportunities. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, participants. Look forward to seeing you at our roundtable.